Huelva, Spain, April 30th, 1943. Huelva, Spain, April 30th, 1943. At 9:30 in the morning, a sardine fisherman named José Antonio Rey Maria pulls something from the shallow water off Punta Umbria, a body, face down, still tethered by a canvas strap to a black briefcase. The man is wearing the uniform of a British Royal Marines officer. He has been in the water long enough that identification will require care. Spanish authorities notify the German Abwehr agent Adolf Klaus within hours. Klaus, operating under diplomatic cover in Huelva, understands immediately what must be done. He contacts Madrid. Madrid contacts Berlin. The briefcase contains letters, personal letters, written between senior British officers, letters that discuss, in careful but damning detail, Allied plans for the invasion of southern Europe, not Sicily, Greece and Sardinia. Klaus cannot know that the man in the uniform has never held a military rank in his life. He cannot know that the letters were composed in a London office by a Naval Intelligence officer who had spent the previous months perfecting the handwriting, the tone, the texture of casual intimacy between men who actually knew each other. He cannot know that the body itself, the body of a man the British have named Major William Martin, Royal Marines, was never Major William Martin at all. The briefcase drifts. The war waits. The impossible problem. It is the spring of 1943, and the problem facing Allied planners is one that admits almost no solution. The Mediterranean is a strategic corridor of stone and sand, and to reach the European continent from North Africa, the Allies must land somewhere. There are only so many coastlines. There are only so many harbours deep enough, beaches flat enough, approaches navigable enough to support the landing of a force numbering in the hundreds of thousands. German military intelligence, the Abwehr and its analytical organs, employs professional geographers who understand this arithmetic as well as any Allied planner. Sicily is the obvious answer. It is so obvious that even Hitler's most credulous generals know it. The island sits at the narrowest waist of the Mediterranean, 60 miles from the Tunisian coast, its beaches wide and its defences, as of early 1943, significantly undermanned. Capture Sicily and Italy breaks open. Every professional reading of the map comes to the same conclusion. The German reconnaissance apparatus in the Mediterranean was, by 1943, neither primitive nor slow. The Luftwaffe's long-range reconnaissance units, Fernaufklärungsgruppe 122 among them, flew regular sorties over Allied staging grounds in North Africa, returning with detailed photographic surveys that were processed by trained Luftbildauswertung interpreters, photo analysts who had been reading aerial imagery since the Polish campaign. These men could distinguish a landing craft from a supply vessel at altitude. They could count vehicle concentrations and extrapolate division strength. They could read a harbour the way a surgeon reads a blood panel. And their conclusions about Allied intent regarding Sicily, by early 1943, were hardening into certainty. Against this apparatus, British planners had tried the obvious remedies. They had used radio deception, broadcasting dummy signals from notional units in positions that suggested alternative targets. The Germans cross-referenced signal intercepts against agent reports from networks in North Africa and Spain, and the discrepancies surfaced quickly. They had attempted physical feints, moving units in ways intended to suggest preparation for landings far from Sicily. The problem was that the required shipping, the specific mix of landing craft and support vessels, told its own story regardless of where the ground units appeared to be moving. Naval logistics could not be faked easily. Every serious study of deception conducted by the London Controlling Section at the small, secretive office charged with coordinating British strategic deception concluded the same thing. To deceive the enemy about Sicily, you could not merely hint at an alternative. You had to make the alternative feel not just possible, but confirmed. You could not plant a rumour. The Abwehr ran extensive counterintelligence checks on every intelligence windfall, and rumours without corroborating documentation collapsed under examination. You could not use a double agent to pass the information. The Germans trusted their agents, of course, but a single source claiming to have heard something was never, on its own, sufficient to move divisions. You could not forge documents and simply leave them somewhere. A document found without provenance, without a story that explained how it arrived and why it was credible, was treated as a plant and discarded. That required a different kind of thinking entirely. The unlikely hero. Before the war, Ewen Montagu is a barrister. He is the second son of Lord Swaithling, educated at Winchester and Harvard and Trinity College, Cambridge. A man whose professional life involves the careful construction of narrative. The art of presenting a set of facts in an order and context that makes a particular conclusion feel not just reasonable, but inevitable. He sails competitively. He has a sharp wit and a fondness for the theatrical. He is not, in any conventional sense, a soldier. When the war begins, Montagu joins Naval Intelligence almost by accident, through connections and the demonstrated quality of a mind that can hold complex arguments and spot their weaknesses simultaneously. His superiors find him useful but occasionally exasperating. He argues back, which in military hierarchies is never entirely welcome. He is assigned to Section 17M, the unit responsible for counter-espionage liaison, and it is here, in the low-lit corridors of the Admiralty, that he first encounters the suggestion that would eventually become Operation Mincemeat. The idea itself does not originate entirely with Montagu. The germ comes from a 1939 memorandum written by an Admiralty officer named Sir Reginald Hall's former protégé, a document that John Masterman later references, and that Charles Cholmondeley, a young flight lieutenant at an M15's B1A section, retrieves and re-examines in late 1942. Cholmondeley has the initial vision. A body planted on an enemy shore, carrying false documents. It is Montagu who understands how to make the body real. He is joined in the project by Cholmondeley, by Hester Leggett, a Wren officer who assists with document preparation, and by a remarkable cast of forgers, chemists, and intelligence officers whose collective expertise spans law, literature, military administration, and the precise replication of institutional correspondence. This is the unit that the London Controlling Section would later describe in internal papers in terms that a stage magician would recognise. Artists, architects and engineers of deception working toward a single vanishing act. Montagu begins working on the problem of the body. The solution revealed. What Montagu understood, and what no intelligence manual of the period explicitly taught, was that the enemy does not believe a document because it is true. The enemy believes a document because everything surrounding it, every physical and biographical detail of its carrier, every crease and stain and personal effect, constructs a world so consistent and so specific that disbelief requires more effort than belief. The distinction between a forgery and a genuine document is, at a certain level of craftsmanship, entirely psychological. The body came first. Montagu needed a corpse that would hold together long enough in seawater to be convincing. A man apparently drowned, apparently washed ashore, apparently dead long enough for his papers to be photographed and returned, without the Spanish noticing they had been removed. Through a contact at St Pancras Hospital, Montagu was introduced to the body of Glyndwr Michael, a 34-year-old Welsh labourer who had died in London on January 28, 1943, from the effects of ingesting rat poison, phosphorus paste, taken either accidentally or deliberately. The pathologist who examined Michael's case, Sir Bernard Spilsbury, was consulted informally on whether the phosphorus damage to Michael's lungs could be mistaken by a Spanish doctor conducting a routine examination for the fluid accumulation of a drowning victim. Spilsbury's conclusion was carefully encouraging. Michael became Major William Martin, Royal Marines, Service number 09560. The construction of Major Martin took the team approximately 3 months. His wallet contained a photograph of his fiancée, a real woman, a secretary named Jean Leslie, whose photograph was borrowed with her knowledge and not returned for weeks. It contained an angry letter from his bank manager at Lloyd's, demanding repayment of an overdraft of £79 and 18 shillings. It contained ticket stubs from a London theatre, the Prince of Wales, for a show running in the week that Martin was supposed to have died. It contained a St Christopher's medal, a bill from a naval outfitter for a new officer's shirt, and a letter from his father. a letter written in the voice of a slightly pompous, slightly anxious English country solicitor, composed by Montagu himself after extended study of the genre. The letters inside the black briefcase were the heart of the operation. Two documents of primary importance. The first was a personal letter from Lieutenant General Sir Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, to General Sir Harold Alexander, commander of the 18th Army Group in North Africa. It was written on genuine War Office letterhead stamped with a genuine seal, and its prose was precisely calibrated. Intimate without being indiscreet, technical without being specific enough to feel planted. It referred to Sicily only as a cover target, a deception in itself, while making clear that the real operations were aimed at the Greek coast and at Sardinia. The second document was a letter from Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten to Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham, mentioning Major Martin by name and noting he was carrying important papers, lending the corps a kind of institutional vouching that made the whole edifice self-reinforcing. Each letter was written and rewritten. The paper was aged. The typewriter ribbons were checked for consistency with the machines that would plausibly have produced such documents. The envelopes were sealed with the kind of care that could withstand examination, a specific technique involving a thin wire thread that would reveal tampering if the Germans opened them incautiously, though Montagu knew the Germans were skilled enough to open them cautiously, and that they would do so, and that the letters would be read. The operation was, at its mechanical level, stage illusion applied to geopolitics. The enemy sees what he expects to see: a dead officer, genuine papers, a coherent story, the eye fills in the rest. Major Martin was dressed, placed in a sealed canister of dry ice, and loaded aboard HMS Seraph, a British submarine, on April 19, 1943. On April 30th, in the early hours before dawn, the canister was opened. The body was floated free off the coast of Huelva in a current that Montagu's team had studied for months, and the submarine slipped back beneath the surface. The briefcase drifted towards shore. Real deployment, the battle test. At 9:30 on the morning of April 30th, 1943, the body came ashore. By the evening of May 1st, the documents had been photographed by the Abwehr and returned to the Spanish authorities, who had passed them along with what their Francoist sympathies permitted, which was a great deal. The photographs reached Madrid. From Madrid, they travelled to Berlin. The entire signal chain from discovery to Abwehr analysis took less than 72 hours, a speed that speaks to how seriously the intelligence was immediately taken. The analyst who examined the letters most carefully was a senior Abwehr officer operating through the Madrid embassy. He was not an unintelligent man. He noticed certain things. The typeface was consistent, the War Office letterhead authentic, the personal details of Major Martin cross-referenced against Royal Marines records through Spanish contacts apparently genuine. A Royal Marines officer named William Martin did exist in service records. Montagu had taken care of this. The analyst searched for the scene where the plant would show. He found the theatre ticket stub slightly puzzling. A man about to depart on a secret courier mission, attending a theatre the night before his departure, seemed casual to the point of negligence. But the British were, the Germans had long concluded, constitutionally casual about certain things. The detail felt more human than suspicious. The analyst's report characterised the documents as, in his assessment, genuine, and recommended their contents be treated as highly reliable intelligence. The report reached Abwehr headquarters under Admiral Canaris. Canaris forwarded it upward. By May 12th, Hitler himself had seen the substance of the letters. His response, relayed through the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht on May 12th, is among the most consequential military orders of the war. German defensive priorities in the Mediterranean are to be shifted. The island of Sardinia is to be reinforced. The Peloponnese is to receive additional garrison strength. The 1st Panzer Division, then being considered for movement towards Sicily, is redirected toward Greece. In his diary entry for May 14th, Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels records his understanding that the English plan to attack via Sardinia and the Balkans. He records this not as a possibility, but as established fact. Meanwhile, on Sicily, the German defensive posture is thinned. General der Panzertruppe Fridolin von Senger und Ettelin, commanding German forces on the island, will later testify that in the weeks before the Allied landing, German reinforcement priorities had visibly shifted elsewhere. The Sicilian garrison remains under strength, its supply lines deprioritised, its command structure not fully integrated with the Italian forces nominally responsible for the island's defence. On the night of July 9, 1943, Operation Husky begins. Airborne elements drop into Sicily in the hours of darkness, some badly scattered by wind, some landing accurately enough to seize key crossroads and bridges. At dawn on July 10th, the seaborne landings commence across a front stretching more than 100 miles of Sicilian coastline. 8 Allied divisions go ashore. The resistance they encounter, while fierce in places, is not what it would have been had the 6 German divisions that were now deployed to Sardinia and Greece been present on Sicily instead. The Wehrmacht officer who commanded the German 15th Panzer Grenadier Division on Sicily later wrote that the speed of the Allied breakout was, to him, inexplicable, given what he had understood to be the relative strengths of the opposing forces. He could not account for the deficit in German armour. He was not, at that point, aware of what had washed ashore near Huelva. Sicily falls in 38 days. The road to mainland Italy opens. If you're finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. It tells the algorithm that serious history still finds an audience, and it genuinely takes about 3 seconds. Part 7. Comparison and Legacy. German deception doctrine in the Second World War was, broadly speaking, passive. The Wehrmacht's Tarnung und Täuschung, concealment and deception, focused primarily on hiding what was real: camouflage nets over armour, dummy artillery positions, radio silence disciplines, the suppression of observable signatures. It was deception in the defensive mode, the art of making something invisible. The British approach in Mincemeat was entirely different in its conceptual orientation. It was not hiding what was real, it was manufacturing what was false, and then engineering the circumstances under which the enemy would find it. That distinction between passive concealment and active fabrication was everything. The Germans were very good at hiding things. They were not structurally prepared for an adversary who understood that the most dangerous lies are the ones the target discovers for himself. The Americans, by 1943, were developing their own deception capabilities. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, later known as the Ghost Army, would deploy in France in 1944, using inflatable tanks, sonic deception equipment, and radio impersonation to simulate entire armoured formations. But the American approach was predominantly physical and electronic. Make noise, create signatures, suggest mass. Mincemeat was different in being biographical. It did not simulate a formation, it simulated a person, a specific, irreplaceable human being with a fiancée and a bank overdraft and a father who worried about him. That intimacy of fabrication had no equivalent in American or German practice. The Japanese approach to strategic deception was largely reactive, responsive to perceived Allied moves rather than proactive in shaping Allied perception. The exception is the elaborate misdirection campaign surrounding the Battle of Midway, where Japanese operational security collapsed not through enemy deception, but through code breaking. The contrast with Mincemeat is instructive. American signals intelligence broke Japanese intentions, while British human intelligence fabricated German ones. 2 entirely different mechanisms for the same strategic goal. The legacy of Mincemeat reaches well beyond Sicily. The London controlling sections, the body that oversaw Montagu's operation, immediately began studying what had worked and why. The central lesson they extracted was the one Montagu had intuited from the beginning. The enemy's analysts are not foolish, they are professional. The way to deceive them is not to construct a simple lie, but to construct a complete world. One in which the lie is the only reasonable conclusion a careful professional can reach. That principle became the conceptual backbone of Operation Bodyguard, the massive strategic deception campaign that preceded the D-Day landings of June 1944. Bodyguard, of which the famous Operation Fortitude was a component, did not simply suggest that the Allies might land somewhere other than Normandy. It constructed an entire fictional army, the first United States Army group supposedly commanded by General George Patton, with notional order of battle radio traffic and agent reports, a ghost formation of 300,000 men that existed only in signal logs and Abwehr files. The men who built Fortitude had read the after-action review of Mincemeat. The logic was continuous, as the most unexpected legacy is perhaps the simplest. In 1953, Ewen Montagu published a book about the operation titled The Man Who Never Was. It became a bestseller. A film followed in 1956. The operation passed into popular culture, which meant that for the first time a successful strategic deception was publicly studied by military theorists around the world, while it was still recent enough to analyse in detail. The professional literature on deception operations, the doctrine that now underlies everything from electronic warfare to information operations, traces part of its genealogy to those lectures and papers. Glyndwr Michael, the Welsh labourer. Glyndwr Michael, the Welsh labourer who became Major William Martin, was eventually given a proper headstone in the Welsh cemetery where he was buried by the Spanish authorities. It reads, William Martin, born 29th March 1907, died 24th April 1943. Glyndwr Michael served as Major William Martin, Royal Marines. His bones rest here, his spirit is with those he served. Honest qualification plus confident conclusion. Assessing the precise historical impact of Operation Mincemeat requires honest qualification. The counterfactual is by definition unavailable. We cannot know with certainty what German dispositions on Sicily would have looked like absent the deception, whether the reinforcement of Sardinia and Greece drew specifically from reserves that would otherwise have gone to Sicily, or whether those reinforcements were already being considered on other grounds. Some historians, notably the intelligence scholar Roger Hesketh, in his analysis of Mediterranean deception, have argued that the German response to mincemeat was genuine but partial, that Hitler's instinct to defend everywhere simultaneously meant the strategic redistribution of forces was perhaps less dramatic than British planners claimed in their own assessments. The relevant German files were not all recovered intact. Portions of Abwehr operational records from 1943 were destroyed before the war's end, and the precise chronology of internal German decision-making in response to the letters remains, in certain details, a matter of reconstruction rather than direct documentation. The question of how much credit for the speed of the Sicilian campaign belongs to mincemeat and how much to other factors, Allied air superiority, Italian demoralisation, the speed of Patton's and Montgomery's advances once ashore, cannot be cleanly resolved. What can be said with reasonable confidence is this. The German 1st Panzer Division was not on Sicily when the Allies landed. The island's garrison was numerically and materially weaker in July 1943 than the strategic situation alone would have justified. Senior German officers recorded in real time a belief in the authenticity of the documents that persisted past the point at which correction might have been possible. And Sicily fell in 38 days, against a timeline that most Allied planners had privately estimated, before the operation at a minimum of 60. Operation Mincemeat was one instrument in an orchestra, but it was an instrument that played a tune no one had played before. Poetic conclusion, call back to opening. On the morning of April 30th, 1943, while a sardine fisherman pulled a body from the shallows off Glyndwr, the men who had built Major William Martin were in London. Ewen Montagu was at his desk in the Admiralty. Charles Cholmondeley was in his office at MY5. They were not waiting in the way soldiers wait before a battle, with rifles and the taste of their own fear. They were waiting the way a playwright waits on opening night, seated somewhere in the dark, listening for the audience to respond at exactly the right moment. The play had been written in a mortuary. The lead actor would never take a bow. The German analysts who examined the documents were not fools. They were not amateurs pulled from civilian life and handed a magnifying glass. They were professionals who had spent years developing the instincts required to distinguish a plant from a windfall, who had read hundreds of intelligence reports and learned to feel the difference between something real and something too convenient. And they were convinced. They were convinced because the theatre ticket was there, and the fiancée was there, and the bank manager's letter was there, and the father's anxious note was there, and a dead man does not carry theatre tickets unless he was alive to use them. The enemy sees what he expects to see, but more precisely, the enemy sees what a complete and consistent human world requires him to see. This was the deeper truth of what Montagu had built. Not a clever forgery, not an elaborate fraud, but an act of empathy in reverse, in the patient, meticulous construction of another person's reality, so fully imagined that strangers 3 countries away would take it for their own. The body drifted. The photographs were taken. The signal went out from Huelva to Madrid to Berlin. A panzer division turned east toward Greece. 38 days after the landings began, Sicily was Allied territory, and the road to Rome opened its first mile. Glyndwr Michael, who in life had no rank and no mission and no fiancée with a photograph, died in London in January and washed ashore in Spain in April and helped end a war he probably never fully understood was happening. He never was, and yet in the end, he was the only one who truly was.